welcome to the Day Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have this session here every essentially Friday to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about data vault, cloud computing, MVP stuff, data mining would work, and so on. A lot of data vault questions, right? And we received essentially a question from one of the audience. Let me just share my screen here. And it's in continuation to some extent when you compare this to the previous sessions here last week's. We talked about PRT tables. So here the question is, and I rephrase this to a bit. So we have a need for PRT tables to be used in different business scenarios, and we'd like to use different SQL statements to load a number of PRT tables, one for each scenario. What is your take on it? So first of all, we have this as well that we do this. But let me start with the typical pattern. Typically, you only need one PRT table, and that's a technical PRT, where you just join all the satellites, identify the latest delta for a given snapshot date, and then indicate that in the index of the PRT table, essentially, right? PRT table is a custom index. So far, so good. And then in the dimensional model, in the information maps, you then customize the presentation for the business scenario. For that, you need the data from the raw data vault, from the business vault, and that's what you use to customize your presentation with dimensions and facts and so on. That's the basic idea. And that should be sufficient in many cases, like 80% of the cases. We have cases when we have multiple PRT tables, etc., where we typically want to apply different timelines, business timelines. Let's say, the technical timeline, where you just join the deltas based on the load date and virtual load end date. And then you might have cases where you want to apply a business timeline like subscription start and end date or valid from valid to date. Instead of rearranging the data in the satellite, we just rearrange the activation of the deltas in the PRT table index. That's quite easy. You just modify the loading structure, the join condition essentially, to identify the most recent delta for a given snapshot date under the I want to say influence, under the assumption of a specific timeline, essentially. So you add the application of a timeline snapshot date between valid from valid to date to the join condition, essentially, of the satellite, roughly speaking. So, and we discussed this a couple of times already. In the book, we essentially created different PRT tables for this. We created one PRT table for a technical PRT, where you just join based on a load date. Then you have we have what we call a temporal pit, where we apply business timelines or a business timeline. And then we have a Q pit, a quality cleansing pit or quality pit, where we essentially, let's say you don't like the delta from John because it may be scrambled or whatever. So you activate, instead of John's delta, you activate the ghost record from the satellite with the default values, or a previous delta from John, or you activate Jim's delta, right? You could activate anything you want. So that's what we call the Q pit. Again, you don't want to update the pit. What you do is you modify the loading procedures, right? Now, that was in the book. Nowadays, if we have these T pits and Q pits or whatever, we don't create additional tables. We create additional partitions in a partition PRT table. For that, you just take the standard structure of the pit and extend it by a type code. The type code could be pit, T pit, Q pit, T pit 2, T pit 3, and so on. And then you have a reference table typically, where you define those codes. Pit means technical pit, T pit is temporal pit, timeline 1, T pit 2 is timeline 2, and so on. And this becomes a filter dimension in your dashboard. And then you apply the filter, the code on the pit table. And that way the user can select essentially the partition of the pit table they want to use for the presentation. And that way they can also switch from one perspective to the next. Users love it because you can super fast switch from one perspective to the next. So that's what I would do. And yes, you can apply any join condition when identifying the most recent delta for a snapshot date. You can do whatever you want, to be honest. And when loading this pit, we also call these business PRT tables because you apply business logic in it. And so you can have these pit tables, but we typically only see a need when you want to apply timelines. Everything else, or timelines, or these Q pits, and everything else, I would essentially do afterwards. I would do in the information map. That's why I'm struggling a bit with the answer, right? So, yeah, don't create multiple pit tables. Create one partition pit table with a type code and the dimension for that. So yeah, so yes, and those partitions you would then load with individual SQL statements. They could also run in parallel, right? Loading data into the same into different partitions of the same table should work, and that would work with different SQL statements for the loads. Plus different SQL statements on top. When you build your dimension, you then have different SQL statements to use the PRT index to join the hub, to join the satellites, essentially, right? And that's where you do most of the logic, hopefully. So that's my take. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. We typically, for the pit tables, we typically have a type code in there, even if the client says, well, I don't need that. Adding a type code is not that expensive, right? And if they change their mind, they can change that. So they can add additional partitions later. We just define some standard PRT code, yeah, PRT typically, or 0 or something. We define that as the type code, as a default one, and then only have one partition in the pits. And that's actually sufficient for many use cases, right? But if you have the type code in there, you can extend it later. That's what I think about it. So yeah, so that's the basic idea, essentially. All right, good question. And the last one of the series, right? So there will be more. I'll receive a couple of questions. So yeah, if you have questions like this, anything about data vaults, MPP, cloud computing, data mining, use this form here at sfr.ee/dvfriday. That's where you can essentially submit your question, submit pictures, drawings if you want, to showcase what you have, essentially what the question is. Don't make it too large, should fit on an HD screen, right, for a good recording. And we have the webinars here at scalefree.to/webinars. You'll find the DBT webinar and the Wirescape webinar, not by me, but by more experienced consultants with the tools of Scalefree, and that's also worth a look. So check them out as well. And if you have an urgent question, if you can't wait until next Friday with your question, or if you don't want to wait until you are scheduled for the session, then you can also join the Data Vault Innovators community that we set up with Ignition Data from Australia. So they do the Data Vault bootcamps over there. And that's essentially a platform where you can join, ask questions, and we get back to you as quick as possible, essentially. We also have recordings, webinars in this format. We just had a session in London, a live session, on-site session, essentially, where we had interesting speakers, interesting presentations, essentially, sponsored by Coalesce at the Snowflake headquarters, or Snowflake offices, essentially, in London. So really fun, really good session. And that's what we also plan to do, having more community meetings, essentially, for this community. So join, it's free. Yeah, so it would be nice to see you on one of these meetings as well, or one of the next conference at Scalefree. Cool. Then hope I gave you some value today. Hope to see you next Friday. I see people coming back, so apparently there's some value for some people at least. And yeah, enjoy your weekend. See you next Friday, guys. Thank you.